Alright, so we saw in reference to the union of Shefa B'Klal and Hashpur, which is called Hashpur Saseichel, but that's called in the concept of Shefa. We saw there was two inyanim in Hashpur, from a Mashpir to a Makabel. One was what we called Hashpur Atzmius, and then was what we called the union from Hashpur Saseichel, which is Hashpur Ha'ora Bil Vad. Hashpur Atzmius is also the union of Hiloda. And then we saw that Mamish brings to a new human, a new entity, Shleimus Amuran, and therefore he has Alidei, that he's Moilid Aben, he also gives him the Etzem Metzias of Seichel, the Etzem Koyach of Seichel. Mashinkin in the union of Hashpur Seichel of a Rav to a Talmud, then it's only Nimshach a Ha'ora of the Seichel Harav. And as we understand Pashtas, that the Rav's Havana in any union is ein areich l'gabi to Talmud. So when it's nimshach from the Rav to the Talmud, then it's moving that it's only a ha'ora bilvad. However, the point that's so important to us here is that it's nimshach the etzem guf ha'ora, the etzem atzmius of that ha'ora, albeit it's only a ha'ora. And that's where we're holding. I think we were holding by the Loshen Akop Communist Reivstel. Shemi'atzmei lo yo'ilu klal, Hashpur Sarav, if he doesn't have Seichel, mi'atzmei. Akamayma ha'olam Akop Communist Reivstellen. You can't put a head up in its place if it's not there. In other words, that if the Makabel doesn't have the necessary kli with which to be Makabel, the Shefa, then he won't be Makabel at all. And that's, if he doesn't have Seichel, then you can't be Mashpir to him Seichel. However, and therefore it needs a Kli, and it needs some form of preparation. It's not giving him his very essence like Hoylada. Umikol Mokim, however, for our point of view, Nimshuk Bazer Guf HaHa'ora. The very self of the Ha'ora goes over to the Makabel. Shahari Guf Sichloi Shalarav Hu Shenimsha Vanishpa Bozeh. Now when we say Guf Sichloi Shalarav, we don't mean the whole perfection of the Seichel is by the Rav. Goes over to the Talmud, like we just pointed out. There's certain inyanim that the Rav would never be able to give over, at least at the first Hashpur, to the Talmud. What we mean is that whatever ha'ora he does find it possible to give to the Talmud, then that ha'ora in its very essence goes the way it is. It's like a transportation of one inyan over to the receiver. V'haraya, what is the proof? Sha'makabel mekabel b'zeh seichel, that he takes the etzem inyan which was given to him. The Rav gives him seichel, and he receives in his koyach seichel, seichel. He takes that what the Rav actually gave him in its own mahus. Dahainu shenimtza al yidei zeh seichel etzem makabel loy mahus acher. In other words, what is now to be found through that Hashpur by the Talmud is in effect Seichel, and not something else. In other words, whatever the Rav gave him, that went over, and the way it was, in all of its entirety, it passed from the Rav to the Talmud, and now it's Nimtza exactly as the Rav gave it. So, albeit, as we pointed out, it may not be the full shleimus of what the Rav has to give, but what he did give goes in its entirety over to the Makabel, and he gave him Seichel. Therefore, whatever reaches him is that Seichel in its full shleimus. And Nimtza alidei zeh Seichel it's a Makabel, lo imahu sacher, not something else. V'hainu, lafisha Hashpur hi guf umahus hadovo. Like we saw when we were talking about Shifas Mayim, the concept of Shefa in Gashmias, we saw that the very essence of the thing the Etzem Mahus now is, which was previously B'mokim Zeh, is now to be found B'mokim Asheni, the same in Ruchnias, that the Etzem Dover K'moishu Eitzel Hamashpia goes over in its full entirety and is now found in its own Mahus in the Seichel of the Mekabel, and that's the Pshat Guf U'Mahus Adover. The Bekol Mokim, that in all places Shashpor Ena Mahus Adover, is Hine Masha Nimtzo Mizeh U Mahus Acher Loi Mahus Dover Hanimsho. Now we're going to do a slightly delicate point, a slightly what we might call complex point. The Rebbe said that wherever the Mahus, albeit only a Ha'ara, but the Mahus of the Ha'ara goes, then that Mahus is Nimshel B'Hasheni. However, he said, wherever the Ashpor is not the Mahus of the Inyan which he really is started to give. In other words, it's not the Mahus of the Inyan Kamoishahu that goes in to the Mekabel. Hine Masha Nimtza Mizeh U Mahus Acher. In other words, that if what he gives to the Mekabel is not the Mahus of what he started to give, as you might say, then what will actually come out by the Mekabel is another Mahus, not that Mahus. It'll be a Mahus Acher, Loi Mahus Tova Hanimsha. Avu Kasher Animtza Hu Oisa Mahus, Loi Mahus Acher, Azeh Hoiroa, Shashpor U Shenimsha Mahus Hador. Now, he said, however, Kasher Animta, that which will be to be found in the Mekabel, who Oisa HaMahus, it's exactly the same Mahus as what the Mashpia wanted to give, and Loi Mahus Acher, not something else. Harizeh Hoiroa, that is an indication that the Hashpur is Nimshach Mahus Ador. In other words, it's like in the second part of the phrase or the sentence, we take it like from the negative back to, or the positive back to the negative. In other words, that if what we find ultimately by the Mekabel is in effect the same thing that the Rav wanted to give him, then that's a sign that what he did give him was Mahus Adora. If, however, we find by the Mekabel that even though he began giving, the source of the Ashpur began giving a certain Inyan, of a Lapuyel that came out another Inyan, then that's a sign that the Mahus of the original Inyan was a Nimsha. In other words, where the Mahus of the original Inyan is not Nimsha Kol HaDerech, the whole way into the Mekabel, then it ends up producing a what you might call a second entity, a second Mahus. Mashiki, where the very Mahus that the Rav, or the source of the Ashpur, wanted to give, goes into the Mekabel, then it stays there and it's to be found there in its very Mahus, and that's an indication, if you can study what's now by the Mekabel after the whole process has completed itself, and you can see that that's another thing, then that's a sign that it wasn't Nimshat the Mahus Hador. But if you find that he's in effect got by him what the Mokia of the Hashpur began to give him, then that's a sign that the very Mahus of the Inyan went across. Now we'll see that the reason why we changed the Loshen slightly is that not always are the Dugmois the same. In other words, that where the Etzem Hashpur Saseichel from a Rav to a Talmud, that usually produces the same Mahus as it was by the Rav into the Talmud. So there we can usually find in the Talmud the same Mahus, and that shows that it was a Hashpur of a Seichel in the normal way, as you might call it. However, if we take where the source of the Hashpur was just Seichel itself, for example, not within the Odom himself, not necessarily an outside force, and he wanted to be mashpia from himself into another aspect of himself, or that seichel, then it could be that in order to produce that other aspect that he wants, somehow or another he'll have to derive or give up the original entity that he's working with and be satisfied with only what you might call a ha'oram is there. Well, then he'll end up producing within himself a slightly different entity than what he began with. But it won't be a false thing and it won't be an improper thing. He'll end up with a good and positive result, but it won't be exactly with what he began. And therefore, the Yesh Leima, that for that reason we sort of alter the expressions, because it depends a little bit on what actual dogma of the inyan and what matziyas, what actual situation you're talking about. And therefore, the first dogma is more within the Adam himself, and the second dogma is where something has been placed into him, and therefore it's easier to trace and to see that what the Mashpia gave over to him is to be found by him. He said, like it's written in other places, the influence of Seichel to a Makabel, Dahainu, a Rav giving Seichel to a Talmud, Hashpoas HaSeichel, compared to Hashpoas HaMidas min HaSeichel. In other words, we do the same thing. We put the resultant first, and we say Hashpoas the Midas from the Seichel, because it's only from the resultant that we can know what really happened in the middle, as it were. In the first case, it's a simple case. The Rav gave Seichel over, and it went, and it's there and noticeable in the Makabel. In the other case, you begin with a Hashpoah of the Seichel, but really what you end up with is a Midah, and therefore you have to go from the Midah and work back to what actually happened to the Seichel. And he goes on to say why. The Hashpoah HaMidas, the bringing about of midas within the Adam himself, ein ze amitias inyan ilava olo. This is not the genuine concept of ilava olo. Now, we implied last night correctly that ilava olo is a case of shefa. Dainu, that what begins in the ila goes over into the Olo and is found in the Olo, as we pointed out. However, if we take how Seichel in a mensch produces midas, as is well known in Tzedus, the genuine midas in Avodas Hashem only come when there's been an activity of the Seichel, and the Seichel arouses the midah and causes the midah to be begoloi. For example, it will soon bring a dogma. If you're misbeinen in the greatness of Hashem, then you react emotionally to that isbonenus. There you have either Avos Hashem or you have Yiras Hashem, which means that the usage of the Seichel produces midas. So he says that where the Hashpoah, the midas, it comes from the Seichel, ein ze mitis inyan of ilava olo. The ilava olo shemahus aila mislabish ba'olo. Like we pointed out last night, the very essence of the derivative enters into the very essence of the source point. Slicha, mahus aila, the very essence of the source, enters into and is mislabish in the derivative. That's the correct way to translate it. Avo bashpoas amidas min haseichel. When you cause in yourself an arousal of midas through the usage of your seichel, then the very essence of your seichel is not nimshach bazeh. She'arei is pilus hamidas hu min habechein levad. Now, this is a famous Siddiq term. You've ever heard of the concept of the bechein? No, you never heard of the loshen bechein. Alright, so what is the bechein? You notice that when a person is misbeinen in a certain inyan, then be'ikah, that is seichel. And that has nothing to do with midas. Now, midas and seichel are two different oilamas altogether. Midas are emotional arousal, what you might call the involvement of the feeling of the self in the matter. Because when you have ava, then you feel fulfilled by elokus. You feel close and stirred by elokus. Yira is you feel beetle and nullification to elokus. But it's all through the feeling of the self and the arousal of emotion, where emotion is a expression of what the self really needs and what it really wants. And that's good in many ways, that should eventually happen. But we can't deceive ourselves that midas is a lower and more self-centered reaction. And seichel doesn't have anything to do with midas in its very definitional essence. Seichel has no connection with midas at all. Seichel is the power of inquiry and understanding and appreciation that the Hashem has given it. And that comes purely to understand the truth and to know what is the amitius of a inyan. It does nothing to do with emotion whatsoever. So how then do we get from seichel to emotion? Because if you'll just give seichel and you'll just push your seichel into more revelation, then it won't produce emotions, because seichel and emotions are almost self-contradictory. And the truth of the matter is that they are self-contradictory. It's brought in the two opposite worlds altogether, midas and seichel. So it's brought in that how do you get from the seichel into the midas, and you arouse nonetheless the midas and cause them to come out through the isboninus of the seichel. The seichel has to go down. The seichel, in other words, if the two are going to come one to the other, then how do you say somebody's got to somebody's got to give in, as it were. So either the seichel's got to give in and come down to the midas, or the midas have got to elevate themselves up and become bottled in the seichel. And the truth of the matter is that that's two different states within a Oivet Hashem. Where the midas go up and become bottled in the seichel, that's a very high madrega. Because then the midas have lost their whole yeshus and they've gone up and they become bottled in the inyan of the seichel. The usual way, which is called chitonius, albeit, but the usual way that things function is that the seichel goes down from its state of elevation and tries somehow or another to reach the midah. So it undergoes a couple of what you might call changes or yeridas or tzimtzumim on the way down to reach the inyan of the midas. And first of all, it goes through what's called midas shebaseichel. In the seichel, there's already a certain reaction to what you understood. And in pure seichel, there's no reaction. Pure seichel just wants to know, and seichel is concerned and dovuk only in what you know. The fact that there should be a midah shebaseichel, well, that's already a certain development inside the seichel towards the seichel losing its own special glory, as you might say, and going down into another world, and that's what we call midas shebaseichel. That's a very delicate and lengthy thing which I can't go into. Or even so, those midas shebaseichel are too elevated to really talk to the midas, because they talk about the etzem toiv of the inyan, and the midas, that's not seichel either, but that's really midas shebaseichel. They talk about the etzem greatness and the goodness of that matter, the etzem, and then the seichel, the midas, however, say what is good for me, masha toiv v'shvili. So how do I get from that etzem toiv, which is moving in the seichel, into the toiv v'shvili, which is the midas? Then the seichel undergoes another yerida, and that yerida is called the v'chein. Now, it's a famous concept in the works of the Rabbeim, the B'chein. And what is the word B'chein? The word B'chein means therefore. B'chein, Chein means this way. B'chein means therefore. And you can almost translate it and therefore, even though the base is not evolved, but that's what it implies. And therefore, meaning, if I understood all this greatness of Hashem, and I understood all these different things in Seichel, now I understood how they've got a certain benefit. There's a certain tuv, tam in those inyonim, what that's called midas shebaseichel. Now I want to get that into my emotional powers. I've got to say, you see, this is an emotional, this is an intellectual matter, but you see, it's good for you also. There's certain inyonim in it which still remain sikliim, but they talk to the midah and they say, if you have these inyonim, then this will be good also for you. And that's called the b'chein. And the truth of the matter is that the b'chein almost divides itself into two sections. because there's a B'chein now, it's still really part of the Seichel, and then as a B'chein now it becomes what we call Seichel Sheba Midas. It's gone right down, in other words, it's Midas Sheba Seichel in a lower way, and then it goes down and becomes what we call Seichel Sheba Midas. Well, that's an even further slabshus on the part of the B'chein, mamish into the Midah, and they're trying to push the Midah to come out. Now, from that we understand, and that's going to become important in the whole understanding, that what we understand from that is that this is not emasa ilah for another dachastika reason, that when you use that old process, you're not producing a midah. You're not being megala a midah purely from the seichel. You have midas anyway. The nefesh habahamis for sure got midas. The nefesh habahamis is only midas. It's got a certain golistic seichel connected with it, but it's only midas. The nefesh elokis has also got midas. It also has midas. And those midas are there, which are the etzem makeup of the nefesh elokis. The seichel doesn't produce or actually give birth to the midas. What the seichel does is arouse the midas to come out of their helem. In other words, that you can live for years and you'll never really feel a love for and a geschmack and a tuf tam and a bittul to elokus. That'll only work if the seichel somehow or another works in such a way that it'll wake up those midas. But it doesn't produce those midas. Those midas are really there. And remember, what the seichel is really doing is trying to give them a good reason that they should come out, because by definition they're behelem. As is brought in Siddur. The only midas that are not behelem the whole time are the midas of the nefesh habahamiyim. The nefesh habahamis is midas are clapping the whole time. On the contrary, they mevalvel the mensch, and they slip him and they dray him a cup midayim b'yom midushaber b'shaitoi. But the midas of the nefesh elokis are to a certain extent behelem. You don't walk around feeling tremendous. I mean, well, maybe you do. I shouldn't say that. Usually, people don't walk around feeling ava for the Eibishter the whole time, every minute. They feel this increasing and burning ava or bittul, which is yira to the Eibishter. But the nefesh elokis has got them. The seichel was given to us to use in such a way that we can gradually make it go down from its machim kvoidei, and it will reach and arouse and bring out the midas mia helamela gilui, and that's called leidas hamidas. The truth is, in Kabbalah it's called leidas hamidas, but it's not. The truth is, brought down and says it's not really leida in a real sense, because leida begins with actually producing the embryo and then bringing him out. Here the embryo is already there, he's already been there a long time. All you got to do is bring him out, and that's the function of the seichel. Nimtza, in order for seichel to produce midah, what actually goes into the midah to produce it and make it come out is not really the mahus of the seichel. It's only a ha'ora b'der b'chein. And that lashon b'chein, as we pointed out, means that it's lost the whole real nobility of seichel, and it's already talking in a midadika fashion. And that's how seichel can go down so far that it talks almost in the language of the midas. And so that's not stama ha'ora b'vad, but that's a yerida and a ha'ora b'derech yerida gedolah. Says the Rebbe, what happens is that where the etzem mahus of the dover, the etzem mahus of the seichel is not nimshach, then what will happen is that another entity comes into play. Another entity which is not really shot to the seichel can come into play, because that particular entity doesn't give its mahus. So since it doesn't give its mahus, it can allow something else to play an important role, legabiyit. Because it's not giving its own mahus. If it gives its own mahus, it will say to any other entity, listen, I'm what I am, you have to become bottled to me. And that's what we say a very high madrega in midas is. What happens is that the midas can go up and become completely bottled in seichel. Well, that's a high madrega, which we'll mention very briefly as we go along here, but that's a very high madrega. But that's what's got to happen. Somebody's got to give way. Something has to happen. Even the seichel conquers the midas altogether, and the midas become drawn into the seichel, or the seichel becomes a servant of the midas, and he just goes down through certain yeridas in order to cause the midas to come out of their Helemela Gilui. Well, that means it's no longer the Mahus of the Ha'ora. Even in the Ha'ora, it's not a Mahus. It's just a almost changed entity, and that's what we call the famous concept in Chassidus of Bechein. And that's why he says, Shaharei is Pilus Hamida Umena Bechein Levad. It's not from the Mahus Ha'ora of the Seichel. The Kashim is Boinein Eich Shalakus Mahavo Machayas Ko Ethanivroim. For example, when a mensch is Mizboinen in himself, and he reflects how Elakus brings into being and is also Machaye Ethanivroim. In other words, that the Elakus, how do you call it in Yiddish, Bashaft, it brings into being every moment, and it also gives the Chayas, the continuing, ongoing life force of all the Nivroim. And in every Nivra, there's a special Koyach Eloki, as Mavua in Shara Yichud, that every Nivra''s got his own particular Gilui of Koyach Eloki, which is bringing him, as we learn over there, every second into being. So therefore, it's also Mahava and it's also Machaya. And as he brings over there the Alter Rebbe in Perik Beis, in the Shara Yichud, Al Tikro Mahava Elama, Al Tikro Machaya Elama Mahava. You shouldn't read the word Machaya, you should read Mahava. Meaning that the Chayas of a thing is not only just its Chayas, but really that Chayas is every second causing it to be recreated. And that's how it is in all the Nivroim, in all created beings, throughout the whole creation. That's really what's happened. So therefore he said every Nivra's got inside it the Koyach Eloki Mahava Oisoi, which means he brings him into being, but also gives him his life force.
Is Mechava like the Bria Yesh Mi'ayin, and then Mechaya is like the blood of the animal?
Yeah. Mahava is Yesh Mi'ayin, that's the Etzem Yisava, the Etzem Brio, and Mechaya is just like the Gilu of the Chayas that keeps it functioning the whole time.
Like eating and
right.
Oh, okay.
But really they're the same thing. The truth of the matter is that they're really the same thing. It's just that like Gabi the Makabel, they look different. The Mahava is really Behelim, because you don't feel how the ages. What you feel is you live. Therefore he said, Ela Mahava Oisoi, Va'ike Hu Elakut. So it follows from that the principle, the Ikar, not just the principle, but really the whole thing is really only Elakut. That's what he says over there in Sha'ayich with the Alter Rebbe. If you really understand it properly, then you realize that the whole Nivra is really only Elakut. Because without that, he's just not there. If a mensch understands that, and he appreciates that, then he becomes emotionally affected. And whatever Dov Gashmi he meets up with, he won't want the physicality of it, he'll want only the Emesa Ika, the Emesa reality of the whole thing, which is Elakut, which means that we live in a state of, like we pointed out, we live in a state of a form of blindness. That we live the whole time, that we just see the Gashmi. On the contrary, we get all Google-eyed by the Gashmi, and we forget about the whole in that's really Elakut. So that's not really an entity. What really is the real entity is Elakut. And that's what he begins Perik Gimel with, the Alter Rebbe in Shara Yichud, as you're familiar with. He begins with the expression, Ve'ilu nitna roshus lo ayin. If we'll be given permission to the eye, then we would see how everything is really only Elakut, and we would relate to the whole in completely differently. Like he brings over there, that we would see how everything is bottled by Matthias Mamish Telekos. In Mamela, we would also be bottled. Like he writes in Perik Memal, the Alter Rebbe, you mustn't take yourself out of it. When you understand that everything is bottled, Telekos, and you have to realize that you also. Because it's very possible for a man to say, oh yes, everything is bottled Telekos, but then he goes home, and he forgets that he's also bottled Telekos. Anyway. So there was the Rebbe, his whole chayfetz, his pnimis rotzen, and his gila rotzen, retzoinoi. Gila rotzen will always be only in Elikus Levad, v'lo b'dover ha'agashmi. In a masha meyer ba'amido, or what actually arouses that ahava in the man, and actually make him have this ahava and this chayfetz to Elikus, hu racha b'chein. It's only the chitonius of the seichel. And what is that? He said, Eich sheyesh chayes eloki v'ayika u'elikus. In other words, the b'chein kilo sums up everything in a very direct way that midah can relate to. And the b'chein says to the midah, listen, everything has got chayes, right? And that chayes is the whole ikar. So the midah says, "Asoy, ooh, wow."
Does the midas have seichel that they can understand?
No, the midas don't have seichel, but they can react to seichel. They can be aroused by seichel if you talk to them sufficiently in their terms. And that's what we say. You got to go down with a b'chein. Yeah, and therefore, what do you say to him? You say to the midah is like we pointed out earlier. The midah is the feeling of the self. So what you got to do is appeal to the self in a high way. And you got to say, listen, why would you want something which is, you're in as being attracted and wanting, being clothed. That's what you are. You're Ava, for example. So why would you want something which is just absolutely superfluous? Want the real thing. Can you understand it? And so the b'chein is no longer real seichel. The b'chein is telling the midah what is really good for you. And that's what I pointed out earlier.
Do this with the midas and nefesh bahamis as well?
Yeah, well, that's after a while. Don't let's jump to it. Right now we're talking about nefesh elokis. After a mensch really gets experienced in this, and he gets fakot, then it's brought down and it says that ava of the nefesh elokis begins to burn up the ava of the nefesh habam. It affects it. It causes it to become puzzled and smitten at the beginning, and then gradually it can take it over. That's ultimately the ultimate perfection of all that is a tzaddik. I mean. But there are all sorts of madrigas on the way. Edify, he said, that's all the b'chein tells him. He said, look, you should realize that everything's alive. What's it alive from? The Eibishter, and the whole ikar point for you is, that's Elikus, divinity. Why should you want the tofel, the superfluous, want the whole principle? Avo ha'inyan sichli, the whole inyan sichli, which brought him to all that. He said that doesn't enter into the midah. In other words, what is the hechrayach sichli? That is a beautiful thing. The infant seichel is not interested in talking about what's good for ziyach, or what is a good thing to react to and to be affected by. The infant seichel. Thanks a lot. At the infant seichel, in its real inyan, the infant seichel says, how do we know b'klal? What's this whole inyan for Elikus? And what's a nivra? And how does it come from Elikus? So therefore, he said the hechrayach, or the proof and the obliging of the mind to come to the conclusion that there really is a koyach elokי, and there is a koyach elokי in everything, and that's what's really mahavim. And without that, he wouldn't be able to exist. What's the whole hechrayach? What's the whole obligation to say that according to the understanding of reasoning and of seichel? He said that you don't tell the nefesh. I'm sorry, the midah. You don't tell the midah that. You just say to the midah, listen, everything lives only from the Eibishter, and mamira, that's the ikar. So, the whole shachli v'tarya, as you might call it, the whole inquiry, which led to this whole picture that everything is really Elikus, and he said that you don't enter into your b'chein. It doesn't come anywhere near the b'chein, because it's the very essence of seichel b'fnei Atzmai. Edify, says the Rebbe, that follows that what actually goes down into the midah is not the inyan sickly BMS at all. It's only almost what you might call a dover acher. It's like a mahus acher, not mamish the mahus of seichel. Because a b'chein is not a dover sickly amiti, it's a seichel how it's oblige itself to come down to try and tell a midah in a way that will interest a midah. And that's the union of a dogma of this concept of a mahus acher, not mamish the same mahu.
If the seichel isn't masking certain in Indian, so the midas can't be affected by it.
Is the seichel masking with the midas?
If the seichel doesn't understand a certain idea in Elikus, so the midas, you can't affect the midas with that.
No, you can't, because the midas, that's inquiry of the seichel. An inquiry of the seichel goes upwards. It goes more and more into detail and into what we call in Chassidus hafshota. The midas are only interested in their.
But if the seichel just.
How does it happen in the middle of that becomes a b'chein? How does the seichel change itself? Well, that's what I pointed out. That's a union from tzimtzum. And the truth of the matter is, it's even more than stama tzimtzum. It's a very powerful tzimtzum. It's something which is bedugma to the tzimtzum harishon. For the union of the seichel in the middle to lose its whole status of seichel and change into a b'chein, then that's a massive form of a change. And there's a whole big biur in there's a very famous mimer from the Alter Rebbe in this Pasha Va'ero in Torah Oyer, whatever he explains how to, what we call is like a hefsek in the middle between seichel and b'chein. And that hefsek is a huge symptom, etc., etc. Because the seichel by definition is its own koyach, and the midas by definition are their own koyach. So how does the seichel start talking in the oven of a midah? There has to be almost like a break in the middle, and it all has to start all over again in a different nusach. And that's what we call b'chein. We don't call it seichel anymore. Erefa, says the Rebbe, but the whole original is boniness. Well, that doesn't come down into the union of the midah at all. That doesn't even enter the midah b'klal. And he said, U'kamoy kain, another form of his boniness. For example, his boniness in the gedulas v'reimamas. Of the Ein Sof, for example. Here, in this particular boniness, we're talking about how Elikus comes down to the Nivroim and is Mechayah, it enters every Nivra and is Mechayah. But there's another form of his boniness, or another form of different forms of his boniness, where we go away from the Nivra and we go up into a understanding how everything is absolutely nothing against the reimamus and the greatness of the Elikus B'etzim. Because the whole union of the Nivroim is by the Eibishter Ein Arei Klal, and that's also for him a tremendous tzimtzum. And therefore we can be misboined in the greatness of the Eibishter, how he's higher than the Nivroim altogether, and the Nivroim have no erech, like Abihim Klal, Klal. Yeah, that's another type of his bonnet, it's another sug. So the Rebbe says, Hine ha'inyan sikli bozeh, eich shehu godel u'maruma. He said how the Eibush is great and completely transcendent. And if somebody is really a great Baal Seichel, then he can also appreciate the oifan, the manner, just how great, and what you might call the description of the Reimamas, just how many Madregan, how many oifanim. You remember we learned about earlier in Samavov here, we learned about what we called the Haskolas Hashlila, or Hasogas Hashlila. What you keep going, you keep, as it were, cancelling out from it, you keep going higher and higher, not by way of direct appreciation, by cancelling out what you already reached, and saying that the emes of Reimamas of Elikus is nothing like this, but it's much higher and much higher. So you keep going in a more elevated way. You can, if you're a very practiced thinker in those matters, you can sometimes understand the oifan, just how much from one level to another the greatness as it were jumped or moved. In other words, you can understand how one level has no erech legabi the other in the very understanding of that level. That's what we call the oifan. That's called the oifan of the godless. That for sure is not meya in any midah which might come from such a bonnet. Kiim zois, what does go into the midah? Asher Hashem godel u'meruma. All you tell the midah is, listen, the Eibush is unbelievable. He's unbelievably great. He's unbelievable transcendent. And the midah says zoi, and from that. And that of the whole detail and all the different levels and all the different shlilas and all the different work and unbelievable effort that he put into that his bonniness, that doesn't reach the the midas at all. What reaches them is only a ha'ora chitzonius bilvad, in this form of what we called abechein. I mean, that's what causes him to be mispoiled. Hare zehu racha oras ha'seichel loy mahus ha'seichel. From that we see, in each case here, that the bechein, which eventually reaches the midas, is only a ha'ora of seichel. Now what we mean is, earlier we said anyway the seichel is only a ha'ora. What we mean is, however, in each thing there's what we call the goof of the thing, or what you might call a come down from the goof of the thing. And therefore that which is the goof of the seichel, that's only by definition a ha'ora, but it's the etzem seichel. Here, even though seichel is only a ha'ora, but this is a yerida from etzem ha'seichel into another world which is called a bechein. Okay, hey, but it's well known. That's one of the very famous, outside of this Hemshech, outside of Samach Vav, that's one of the very famous Hemshechim from the Rebbe Rashab, Shavuos Samach Hey. But over there, in the second Maimah over there, the Rebbe talks about these inyonim, about Irli V'Ol and Seichel Midas, and he talks about that at great length. And over there he points out that particular point, that where the seichel doesn't go over in its own mahus, but it changes into another mahus, which is close to another mahus, then what it really ends up doing is producing a midah. It doesn't translate its own self into the midah. It doesn't go over. So kumta is that here the mashpia is the seichel of the mensch. The makabel is the midah. What the seichel gives into the midah, have you got some problem? Listen, stop it, boy, okay? I don't want it. If you want to take part in these classes, you have to watch. We've got some bokrim who are prepared to watch every word and pay attention. The minute you turn over and make a schmeichel at him, you miss about 50 different points. Okay? So either you work it out and you're part of it, or gesundheit. And I know there's a whole bunch of guys that didn't come in here for class tonight. Also, you have to tell the shliach, you have to explain to him, he's got to work out what's he doing. Either he's in the class or he's not. If somebody has to talk with me. If somebody just doesn't show up, then I need to be told about it. That says the Rebbe, the seichel here hasn't gone over in its own mahus. It's gone over almost in a dover nivdal from itself, almost like another entity, and therefore it busies itself and produces you at the end another entity. So what you look at, the result is you see that really that seichel has become almost a midah, even though it's not mamish a midah, it's a seichel inside a midah, but it's produced be'ika another thing. And therefore what it began with and what it is now is two different inyanim altogether. And therefore, says the Rebbe, that's one oifen that you can give over seichel, but not what we're talking about, not the inyan of emesa hashpoah. That's a form of hashpoah, but it's not emesa hashpoah, and therefore it's not emesa iliva hol. Ulefi omim, yesh seichel atzmei meir b'hamidas. Sometimes within the mensch, you can have where the seichel is very soak goes into the midas, but as we pointed out, that's a different form of Aveda altogether. And then the midas, on the contrary, really come up and become bottled inside the seichel. They give away their whole emotional state, and they become bottled and niklal in the seichel. Yeah, and therefore he says, Meir b'midas, v'heim b'chinas gadlus hamidas. Well, that's called the union of the greatness of the midas. Their coming about is not only from the bechein, well, that's a very, very high madrega. It's brought in Kuntzes HaTfilah. The Rebbe brings it down Barichas and Kuntzes HaVeda, and he said that's a very high madrega, and it's called Gadlus HaMoichet and Gadlus HaMidas. In other words, that the actual mahus of the seichel goes into the midas, in the lave. V'yaz midas be'emes ein midas. Then the midas, that's what I said to you before, really the midas, somebody has to go. Either the seichel has to go and it becomes close to a midah, or the midas go and they become close to the to the seichel. So he said that's what happens in this case, that they're no longer really midas. Ki imeim k'moi seichel mamish, k'moi shekosim mizeh b'divu ma yon to Rosh Hashanah Samachay. That's another hemshech in Samachay. Yeah, but over there the Rebbe said, and the point he makes over there is that then the midas, they become. Are you sure you haven't heard anything from your phone? No?
Right now.
Huh?
Right now.
Because I would have thought that he has to be here. Why do you give it to him? It's just right now?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello? כן? כן. איפה אתה נמצא עכשיו? איפה אתה נכנסת? מבוא? אני נמצא במרכז כפר חב"ד, יש בית כנסת שקוראים לזה בית מנחם. אבל זה, תסתכל אם יש על זה השם בית מנחם. בית כנסת גדול שיש על זה השם בית מנחם. ויש על יד זה כיכר כזה. אז תפנה ימינה בכיכר, ואתה תיסע איזה כמה מאות מטרים, ובצד ימין אתה תראה בניין גבוה שבולט בשטח, וזה הישיבה. ויש מין חנייה כזו שאתה יכול להיכנס לתוך החנייה. טוב, בסדר, ממש בעוד 2 דקות, 3 דקות באיזה שם אני יוצא. טוב, תודה רבה. Okay. Amamira says the Rebbe, in that case, yeah, what happens over there is that the midah, it gives way, as you might say. The midah loses its whole materials, and it becomes bottled in the seichel, and he said that's called the midas de gadlus. That's called midas of greatness, midas of both gadlus and midas and gadlus of seichel. She'ain pnimis amidas, harihein kemohus moichin mamish. Well, it's written over there, and in Etta from the Rebbe Rashab, where he writes over there that those midas are really what he calls, they're part of the tsiur koimo of the moichin. They really belong inside the moichin. They've gone up out of their whole emotional state, and they've gone inside they become, as it were, drawn up into the status of moichin. Moichin mamish, v'ainu l'fisha nimshach o meya mahus ha'oras ha'seichel b'leiv. In other words, that's a case of emes shefa, emes ashpah, that the very mahus in of the seichel conquers the leiv. And mamela, it's all like miksha achas. It's all one inyan of seichel. It's seichel here and seichel over there. Over there. Mamela. Aber is a bechitzenius ha-seichel, bechitzenius ha-midas, ma'ashem me'yamin ha-seichel, b'leiv hu ha'ora levad. And that's what we call the bechein. V'lochim ma'ashem nimtza mizeh, hu midas v'loi moichen. He said, since it's only a ha'ora, it's not the mohus ha-dover, then it's not emes ha'ashpoah, then anything can happen. As you might say, what happens is you really end up with another result. You end up with a midah and not with seichel. But he said, whenever you give it, the Rav gives over to the Talmud, yeah, then he gives him mamish in infant seichel. But he said, Ashpa, a-seichel me'arav el a-Talmud, hari nimtza be-a-Talmud gam kein seichel. What he gives into the mind of the Talmud is what he had. He had seichel and he gave it into the mind of the Talmud. Masha nimtza be-lefisha nimtza bezeh, where are we? Nimsha bezeh, mahus ha-seichel, loy ha'ora levad. That is the very mahus of the seichel, not a ha'ora. Over where you got the union of seichel going forth, and it only goes into a ha'ora, which is not really its own nobility, it's not really its own essence, then it really enters something else, and the real result is another entity altogether, not really what you began with. And why is that? Because it's only chitzenius seichel and chitzenius hamidas. What you talk about the union of giving seichel mamish kamoisha hu, Seichel is be'etzem pnimiusay, then that can go into inside the Adam himself and go into the midas, and it can cause them to become completely bottle and nichol olim in the union of the Seichel.